Hello and welcome to the final episode of Bendigo Decides for the year in this election season. Now, what has happened since the last time we've caught up, Tom?
Well, the ALP has gained government, though at the moment the ABC is saying, this is on Wednesday afternoon, early Wednesday afternoon, the ABC's confirmed 45 seats for the ALP, which is enough to get them into government in their own right, with maybe two extra seats to go, 2 or 3, and 35 for the coalition. So quite a comfortable win in the end.
And there has been a whole election since the last time we've caught up. So let's just run through it. We will start with the Bendigo seats. In both cases, Bendigo East and Bendigo West, the Labor Party did get a swing.
Yeah, they got a swing to them. So at the moment, for Marie Edwards, it's about a very large swing.
3.8%.
And so they're now on a two-party preferred basis. They've got 62% of the vote, so when you count in preferences and other things. So now Marie Edwards is quite comfortably sitting on a good margin for a next election. And you would think that probably we'd start to call Bendigo West a safe seat again, as we did when Bob Cameron had it. It looks like she's now very much enjoying the support that local members tend to get.
And this is something that she is very happy about.
Yeah, well, she's very happy about it. She was very happy and relaxed when we interviewed her on the weekend, just after she had given her speech, her victory speech, which I'm sure you're sticking up online too, Lewis.
That will be going up. If not with this article, it will be up before too long.
All right, wonderful. And in Bendigo East, Jacinta Allen, of course, has retained her seat, and it looks like, at least from the reports that are coming out today, that she'll have a very, very senior cabinet portfolio. I guess there's a lot of speculation that she's going to get agriculture, and the Victorian Farmers Federation are really keen to see her get that, and very publicly saying that she's the most experienced person in the cabinet room, who will be in the cabinet room. She's still got to get selected for the cabinet. In the ALP, that process is a factional process. The factions put forward the candidates to get into the cabinet itself, to sit in cabinet, at least at a state level, and then Daniel Andrews will select who gets which role from there.
And this process, how long does that normally take?
They're going to sit down today and elect people to cabinet, and then tomorrow, on Thursday, the final portfolios will be announced. So Jacinta Allen's, she might even be Deputy Premier, we're not sure yet, but she's definitely a favourite as far as the local media are concerned, and from the Victorian Farmers Federation's point of view, a favourite to be Agriculture Minister.
And that can be a very, very good news for Bendigo.
Well, she's the most senior politician in Bendigo now, since Steve Gibbons left at the last federal election, and she certainly is pretty comfortable in the role. She's been in the shadow cabinet now for a very long time, for about a decade, I think.
When we have winners, we have to have people that didn't win. And the Liberal candidates that did not win were Greg Bickley and Michael Langland.
Greg Bickley's really interesting. We interviewed him as well on election eve, or election night, I should say. And he was pretty upbeat, I think, very tired from what he was saying, at least off the record. He was exhausted after a full last week of campaigning, but he was pretty upbeat. He was saying that he'd definitely like to either run again or have a position in the Liberal Party doing something or other.
That's right. He's definitely interested in continuing. In what context, he didn't really want to say, and he didn't really... I don't think he even knows at this stage. He did say that he's going to take some time off and think and decide what he wants to do next year.
He did end up having a bit of a first preference swing towards him at this state election. I haven't been able to look at first preference flows yet. They're not available, so we don't know exactly whether that's because he was the local candidate, or whether because he's such a high profile candidate, or whether it was because he got a bit more votes due to the fact that there weren't as many people running in this state election as the last state election in Bendigo East. It's something to look to, and I think it probably does in the end at least suggest that his high profileness as a seasoned campaigner certainly paid off.
That's absolutely right. It doesn't surprise me that someone of Greg Bickley's calibre did get a little bit of a first preference swing, because he's a big name. He's had his big name around town. He's had last year and he's had this year 2 consecutive elections, and even though he didn't win either of them, he still made a big name for himself. Now, of course, there's Michael Langdon over in Bendigo West. He also had a first preference swing.
Yeah, I think that this one's we can probably more easily say it's because there were less candidates from the more right-wing parties. So
the list was quite long last time around.
That's right. I don't know if you've got the data there for any swing against him from a larger level. It looks like, at least from the two-party swing, that he did have 3.8% swing against him, but until we see where the preference flows were, I don't know if it's worth saying any more on it just yet. But look, we could speculate and say that he, he probably was never going to have a best campaign because of the way it started with Jack Lyons resigning and then probably not being able to be quite as active because he was going from a standing start, or at least not as high profile as Greg Bickley.
Yeah, you have to remember that he didn't go into this election with the intention of running. Someone else was doing that.
Yeah.
He was chosen because he was just a very experienced person that could handle the negative backlash.
Yeah, well, that's right. And because he ran in Bendigo East, actually, at the last election. So, those... Obviously, he was as much a saving face as anything else, which it looks like he did quite well because he did get a swing to him, and that's always good in terms of first preferences. All
right, let's talk about the other big name, I'll say, as far as the Bendigo stands in the local election. The other sort of candidate that has been in the news lately, Elise Chapman.
Yeah, didn't get a huge part of the vote. I think from what you've got there, your data's saying 2.7%. Mine's saying about that too, but we've still got to wait to see exactly what her final first preferences were, but not heaps. Probably, I guess you'd be a little bit disappointed with that. I would have thought that she could have gotten a bit more. But I think too, she came into the election quite late. She was only campaigning for about a month, and I don't think you can do that in Bendigo anymore. You've got to be in it for a longer time. And I think too, at least my sense from having interviewed her on Phoenix FM, she didn't want to talk about the big issue that probably would galvanise votes for her. She didn't want to speak about the mosque stuff, and she couldn't speak about a lot of local government stuff because legally she can't. She can't stump for her own state stuff and political stuff at the same time. So probably she was a bit hamstrung.
She was in this awkward position.
Yeah, and she definitely didn't want to talk about the mosque stuff. I think that the impression I get is that people were talking to her about it off camera. That's what a lot of people wanted to talk to her about, and probably where she could have gotten more votes. She didn't want to make that into her campaign.
I do know out of the election, the impression I was getting is that she is considering this a bit more of a warm-up act, and she wants to have another go later on down the track.
Well, maybe. I mean, she's pretty ambitious. She certainly considered running at the last federal election in 2013. I guess we'll have to wait and see what she does, but I think that it's not the end of her as a federal candidate, or maybe even a state candidate in elections to come.
One of the big trends across... Well, there are a couple of trends across the state that I've noticed. Aside from the statewide Labor gain leading towards, among other things, a new premier, I noticed the Nationals have taken a bit of a hit. This is something I started to notice before the election. I found it to be very curious that they didn't put any candidates up for Bendigo East or West. But in some of the places that they did put up candidates, places that they've generally had a pretty confident, pretty comfortable record, they've not fared as well. Well,
in Morwell, they look to only just be holding on. There's a recount going on at the moment in Gippsland, in the Gippsland seat of Morwell. At the moment, it looks like the Nationals candidate, Russell North, will just get it, just win. That's a seat in which there's been a bit of a backlash towards the Nationals because the coalition government was heavily criticised right after the Morwell mines fires.
Yep.
And that's had a real impact on them. I think too, it's a seat with high unemployment, and what we also saw in the other seat we'll look at, which is Shepparton, that's played a part in terms of voter dissatisfaction. And then it seems like you only need something to trigger a big backlash against the national parties in Morwell, and that was the mines fire. Yeah,
and I've got the most recent results from the Morwell recount as far as abc.net.au is saying, and there is a 11.5% swing towards the ALP. And moving over to Shepparton, there's a slightly different story going on. We've got a new national candidate. After Jeanette Powell has stepped down, there's a new national candidate, Greg Barr, who's been contending the seat. But he's not looking to do quite as well.
No, he's going to lose it. He's going to lose that seat to an independent called Susanna Sheed. This is a real surprise for a lot of people. Susanna Sheed, from what I understand, she got into the race quite late, about a month before the campaign, before the election finished. But it looks very much as if with a new Nationals candidate she was able to get in. She got a lot of support. As far as the Weekly Times, I'm going off Weekly Times reports that the Shepparton News, the local paper up there, or one of the local papers, heavily supported Susanna Sheed. I think it's another one where you've got high unemployment rates, you've got a coalition government that was a bit on the nose anyway, and in this case, a lot of Conservative voters have decided to take their votes to an independent candidate who was seen as a better alternative to both Labor and to the coalition. This is, I guess, a similar thing to Indi, the federal seat of Indi, where Cathy McGowan won her seat off Sophie Mirabella at the last election.
Yep.
Seemed to come out of nowhere, but very much fueled by dissatisfaction with the coalition government, with a similar dissatisfaction to the Labor Party. I think in the end, what's gotten Susanna Sheed over the line is that is preferences from the Labor Party and maybe from the Greens as well. And I think too, the Australian Country Alliance took a big hit in terms of first preferences in that seat.
Yeah, we are looking at a seat that has previously been very safe for the Nationals, and they look set to lose it now.
Well, I think that there's some very big experiments going on. Voters up that way in these Conservative seats in Northern Victoria are now willing to experiment with independents, which is something that maybe they haven't been quite as willing to do in the last couple of decades. What's surprising about Shepparton and also about Indi is that those seats have swung away from Labor as well. You don't see protest votes for them.
The other seat that we've actually talked about a fair bit during this series this year is the Frankston seat, because they're the candidate that the independent candidate Jeff Shaw has been in the news quite a lot this year.
Yeah.
And it looks like he's going to lose that seat.
Well, he's going to lose. I think, what has he got? 10% of the primary vote, something like that.
Let's 13.8% according to ABC. This is 11:30 Wednesday morning, the most recent update.
And at the moment there's a recount going on, but it looks very much to be a seat that's too close to call, at least from what information we've got on it. I guess Jeff Shaw never really had a chance. Because he was never going to get preference by the Liberal Party, and the Labor Party don't like him because of his policies. So he was always going to be gone. But of course, the interesting thing is that his tumultuous time has opened up the door for Labor to maybe gain a seat there.
The most recent result does give Labor a very, very slight advantage in the two party preferred, with 50.1% over the Liberals 49.9%. That's almost as close as you can get.
Absolutely.
And I don't think anyone was actually going to predict this. I mean, we obviously knew that Jeff Shaw was not going to be able to retain the seat after what's been going on, but I think a lot of people would have predicted the Liberal Party to just come in and pick up the seat.
Yeah, you'd think so, wouldn't you? But it looks like Labor's going to at least be put up a very big fight for it.
Okay, now let's talk about one of the more high-profile effects of the election, the change in government. We've got a new Premier. He's
hit the ground running. At the moment, he's picking his cabinet, but of course the other things he's done is his very first act is to try and get on top of the ambulance pay dispute that's going on. As I understand it, he has now gotten rid of Ambulance Victoria's board and brought in an administrator, but he's also, of course, talking about a TAFE rescue package that's going to go before the House pretty quickly, I think, pretty soon. So that's something to keep an eye on, particularly because the ALP during the election linked its TAFE plan so closely with jobs and with the jobs crisis that's the unemployment crisis that's currently gripping the state.
He's really starting to make good on a lot of his pre-election promises, which I guess is a promising sign.
It is a promising sign. Because wait for it a year in, see where we are with these things. I think you can't really measure the veracity of somebody's promises until you see them about a year or a year and a half into their term.
I'm not going to disagree with that. Shortly after the election, the Greens made a statement saying that because they were happy enough to pick up their Melbourne seat, and they made a statement saying that now that they've got this seat and they've got had a bit of a swing in the election, that Daniel Andrews is going to have to green himself up a bit.
Well, he might have to. It looks like the Greens won't have the balance of power in the lower house. At the moment in the upper house, it's too early to tell what's going to happen there because they're recounting all the votes, and I think it's probably best just to leave that one until we've got a more accurate idea about who's in. I think that at the moment the ABC and the AEC, the VEC, haven't got any really accurate data out about the upper house. But in the lower house, they won't have the balance of power. But certainly with inner city seats like Melbourne and Richmond starting to now to produce Greens members of Parliament, maybe Labor's got to swing to its left again, as it's done in the past, but has tried to distance itself, particularly on green policies. It's tried to distance itself at this election.
That's quite possibly right. This has been the last episode of Bendigo Decides for the year. Now, last week when we caught up, you predicted Labor would win. And it happened, so you get a chance to gloat.
I do get a chance to gloat. I always enjoy gloating, but this time I'll do it stoically, and I won't jump up and down and party.
We'll probably be catch up again in about 2 years' time when there's a federal election.
Yep, absolutely. And of course there's a local election coming up, I think, next year too, so we'll have to watch that space as well.
We'll keep an eye on that. Hopefully there'll be some content for that. Mm-hmm. All right, thank you, Tom. Remember, keep an eye on www.thenewlocal.net. There will be a couple of election night interviews that are going to go up at some point in the next... I hope it won't be too long anyway. It depends on how long I have to actually sit down and edit them. But yeah, thank you. This has been Bendigo Decides.
Thank you, Lewis.
See you later.